Welcome to India Sports News, India's premier news site for sports, information, news, views, and everything around sports in India and around the world. I am Chandresh Narayanan, and we are back with episode number 2 in our lead up to the Cricket World Cup 2023. And I have with me my good friend and cricket, what do I say, encyclopedia, Devendra Prabhudesai, to chat today. Which World Cup are we talking about today, Devendra?
The fourth?
The fourth one, that's right, the 1987 World Cup, which was held in India and Pakistan. और ये World Cup की कहानी 83 World Cup से थोड़ी बहुत जुड़ी हुई है, because फाइनल से शुरू होता है and it leads into the 87 World Cup. Am I right?
Correct, exactly.
Can you tell us more about that?
तो बेसिकली हुआ ये कि जब हम 83 फाइनल में क्वालिफाई हुए, हमने इंग्लैंड को सेमीफाइनल में हराया कपिल देव की टीम ने, और 25 जून 1983 को मैच होनी थी वर्ल्ड कप फाइनल, इंडिया वर्सेस वेस्ट इंडीज एट लॉर्ड्स. और एनकेपी साल्वे जो उस वक्त बीसीसीआई के प्रेसिडेंट थे, ही वाज आल्सो अ सीनियर मिनिस्टर इन द यूनियन गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एट दैट टाइम. He made a request for a couple of extra tickets for the World Cup final. He made that request to MCC, which as we all know, they owned the Lord's cricket ground. और MCC को क्रिकेट का सबसे बड़ा क्लब माना जाता है. सारे जो लॉज ऑफ क्रिकेट होते हैं वो MCC डिसाइड करता है. और उनको रिजेक्ट किया गया, उनको मना कर दिया 2 एक्स्ट्रा टिकट देने से. MCC refused his request, and he was very upset with what had happened, because he was like certain that had it been any other country and the president of the cricket board of that country would have made a request only because his team was playing the final, the MCC would not have probably refused. But because it was India, they ended up refusing. As it turned out, we happened to win that final. We won the World Cup. A couple of days later, there was a get-together in London, जहाँ पे साल्वे साहब थे, and Air Marshal Noor Khan, who was his Pakistani counterpart, the head of the BCCP. That time, the Pakistan Cricket Board was called the Board of Control for Cricket in Pakistan. तो वो दोनों थे, और दोनों में बातचीत हुई, and Mr. Salve was still very angry with what had happened with the MCC's refusal to give him extra tickets. और ऐसे ही बात शुरू हुई, and they were like, they came to this conclusion that why is it that the World Cup, the Cricket World Cup, should always be held in England? 75 World Cup, the inaugural World Cup was held in England, 79 as well, 83 as well, and now 87, they have already started talking about the 87 World Cup. So where is it written? Why is England getting a monopoly, and why is nobody disputing that? कोई सामने से क्यों नहीं बोल रहा है कि हम भी वर्ल्ड कप ऑर्गेनाइज कर सकते हैं? तो वन थिंग लेड टू अनदर, और फिर दोनों ने डिसाइड किया, बीसीसीआई के प्रेसिडेंट और पाकिस्तान क्रिकेट बोर्ड के चेयरमैन, उन्होंने डिसाइड किया कि हम इंडिया और पाकिस्तान दे विल कम टुगेदर, और वो एक जॉइंट बिड करेंगे फॉर द 1987 वर्ल्ड कप. सो दैट इज हाउ इट ऑल बिगैन. एंड 19 जुलाई, मतलब एक साल बाद, उस इनिशियल कॉन्वर्सेशन के एक साल बाद, आईसीसी की जब एनुअल कॉन्फ्रेंस हुई लंदन में ऑन 19 जुलाई 1984, दैट इज व्हेन द इंडिया पाकिस्तान कंबाइन टुक ऑन द सो कॉल्ड वेस्टर्न पावर्स, and we won the bid. India and Pakistan won that bid, and the 1987 World Cup hosting rights were officially given to India and Pakistan.
और ये दिलचस्प कहानी के बावजूद, जीत के बावजूद, आप सबको बता दें, उसके बाद भी कोई गारंटी मनी देना था इंडिया पाकिस्तान को फॉरेन एक्सचेंज के तौर पर, जिसको लेकर भी काफी दिक्कतें पैदा हुई थी, बिकॉज दैट वाज अ डिफरेंट इंडिया एट दैट टाइम. फॉरेन एक्सचेंज वाज एन इशू. मेरे फादर और उनके जमाने के लोग बताते हैं कि if you have to take money out of India at that time in the 80s or even before that, it used to be a gigantic task. What was the issue? They tried to reach out to a number of multinationals to come
Yes,
on board.
I mean, as you rightly said, it was a different India. उस आज का इंडिया वो नहीं था, दूसरा इंडिया था. लिबरलाइजेशन had not happened. वो जो 1991 में हुआ, where the economy was opened up. So we were a conservative society, and as Chandresh mentioned, काफी कुछ it was very difficult to start businesses, get money into the country, get money out of the country, and होता ये था कि जब कभी कुछ इशू होता था, मतलब 84 सीजन 85 सीजन में जब इंडिया टीम्स को होस्ट कर रही थी, जैसे कि 83 के सीजन में वेस्ट इंडीज की टीम इंडिया आई, उसके बाद के सीजन में ऑस्ट्रेलिया की टीम वनडे सीरीज खेलने आई, और फिर इंग्लैंड की टीम पूरी सीरीज वनडे एंड टेस्ट सीरीज खेलने आई. तो कुछ थोड़ी बहुत अगर कुछ दिक्कत हो चाहे बैड लाइट हो या फिर बारिश की वजह से ग्राउंड सॉगी होने की वजह से इफ प्ले डज नॉट स्टार्ट ऑन टाइम, तो इंग्लिश मीडिया, ऑस्ट्रेलियन मीडिया बहुत क्रिटिसाइज भी करते थे कि इनको ठीक तरह से मैचेस भी ऑर्गेनाइज करने को नहीं आता, और ये बोल रहे हैं कि वर्ल्ड कप होस्ट करेंगे 1987 में। ये भी बातें हो रही थी कि इंडिया और पाकिस्तान तब तक 3 जंगें लड़ चुके थे, 1947, 1965 एंड 1971। तो ये भी एक था that how could two countries who had been at war with each other, how could they possibly come together to host a World Cup? And as you mentioned, there were a lot of issues getting the foreign exchange, getting a sponsor on board, but ultimately Reliance stepped forward. Anil Ambani, the younger of the Ambani brothers, he was driving that process. And I think it was in 86 or so that we heard that the World Cup would be officially called the Reliance World Cup.
और मैं ये भी कहानी मैंने सुनी है और पढ़ी है उसके बारे में कि उस वक्त जो है उस वक्त के प्राइम मिनिस्टर राजीव गांधी को स्टेप इन करना पड़ा काफ़ी बार, ये पूरे फॉरेन एक्सचेंज के मामले में। हिंदुजा ग्रुप की बात हो रही थी, काफ़ी मल्टीनेशनल से मना कर दिया था, फिर आखिरकार रिलायंस ग्रुप स्टेप इन किया। और अनिल अंबानी के बारे में पाकिस्तान में भी काफ़ी तारीफें होती थी उस वक्त, क्योंकि उन्होंने काफ़ी बढ़िया तरीके से इसको मैनेज किया था उस वर्ल्ड कप को मामले को लेकर। और 87 या 86 में इंडिया पाकिस्तान फिर एक बार जंग के माहौल में पहुंच गया था।
अर्ली 87 में देयर वाज अ सिचुएशन वेयर दोनों कंट्रीज की आर्मीज बॉर्डर पे दे वर फेसिंग ईच अदर, बट वो नहीं हुआ। आई थिंक जिया उल हक जो पाकिस्तान के प्रेसिडेंट थे, जयपुर टेस्ट मैच देखने आए, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान की टीम उस वक्त इंडिया के दौरे पे थी। सो इमेजिन कीजिए ये सिचुएशन कि 2 कंट्रीज में क्रिकेट की सीरीज चल रही है, टेस्ट सीरीज चल रही है, बट ऑन द बॉर्डर द आर्मीज ऑफ बोथ द कंट्रीज आर फेसिंग ईच अदर। सो प्रेसिडेंट जिया उल हक केम टू इंडिया, ही केम टू जयपुर, थोड़ी कमेंट्री भी की उन्होंने, लाइव कमेंट्री, एंड दिस सिचुएशन वाज डिफ्यूज्ड. He met Rajiv Gandhi, and that entire thing was diffused. But as you mentioned Rajiv Gandhi, now he was always a passionate sports lover, because 1982 में जब इंडिया ने एशियन गेम्स होस्ट किए थे दिल्ली में, so Rajiv Gandhi was involved in that entire planning process. So it was but natural for him to take a personal interest in the cricket World Cup, क्योंकि ऐसे पहली बार होने वाला था कि एक वर्ल्ड कप इंडिया में हो रहा था।
और एक बात बता दूं आप सबको कि आज आप सुनेंगे तो आप हैरान होंगे, पर ऐसी भी बात थी कि उस वर्ल्ड कप में ये हो सकता था कि भारत में जो मैचेस हैं वो शायद टेलीकास्ट ही ना हो, क्योंकि बीसीसीआई और दूरदर्शन के बीच में किसी किस्म का मतलब एज इन दे वर नॉट एबल टू एग्री ऑन अ लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स। प्राइमरी थिंग बीइंग बीसीसीआई सेड यू हैव टू पे, एंड दूरदर्शन सेड सॉरी, वी आर द मोनोपोली ब्रॉडकास्टर, वी कांट पे। एंड द बीसीसीआई एक्चुअली वेंट टू द मार्केट through Mudra, which was the agency, and they actually told broad sponsors that it will be possible that none of the matches will be telecast live, so you have to be prepared for that. It's unheard of,
unbelievable. अभी जैसे आपने कहा डीडी had a monopoly, दूरदर्शन was the only channel then. वो आज के जनरेशन को ये बिलीव करना थोड़ा मुश्किल होगा। एक ही चैनल था, गवर्नमेंट ओन्ड चैनल दूरदर्शन, और टीवी राइट्स क्या होती है ये बीसीसीआई को पता भी नहीं था। तो दूरदर्शन बीसीसीआई से पैसे लेता था मैचेस टेलीकास्ट करने के लिए। 80s के दशक में और 70s के दशक में भी जो सारी सीरीज इंडिया में खेली गई, उसका लाइव टेलीकास्ट दूरदर्शन पे हुआ बाय डिफॉल्ट, क्योंकि एक ही तो चैनल था। और वो टेलीकास्ट करने के लिए बीसीसीआई को दूरदर्शन को पैसे देने पड़ते थे। आज जैसे कि हम जानते हैं मामला उल्टा हो गया है, वेयर द channel, the network that has the hosting rights, the television rights, they have to pay the host board, the host association money for the rights. लेकिन उस वक्त वैसे नहीं था, बीसीसीआई को पैसे देने पड़ रहे थे दूरदर्शन को कि सर प्लीज सर हमारे मैचेस दिखाओ सर।
अब तो ये भी नहीं पता how many zeros are there in the bid.
Exactly, अभी तो that is now, वो तो अभी अलग लेवल पे चला गया।
पर उस वक्त अगेन राजीव गांधी had to step in, क्योंकि उस वक्त के इंफॉर्मेशन ब्रॉडकास्टिंग मिनिस्टर मिस्टर अजीत कुमार पांजा, इवन ही कुडंट इन्फ्लुएंस द दूरदर्शन ऑफिशियल्स टू सॉर्ट दिस मैटर आउट, एंड फाइनली इट वाज सॉर्टेड आउट, एंड दिस डिस्पाइट द फैक्ट दैट लाइक यू मेंशन्ड एनकेपी साल्वे वाज अ यूनियन मिनिस्टर, And then he was no longer the BCCI president, but he was still the president of that IPJM, India
Yeah,
Pakistan
the joint committee that was formed by India and Pakistan to oversee the World Cup preparations was headed by Mr. Salve. So his term as president, as you said, had finished as BCCI president. But उनसे कहा गया कि आप शुरू से इस प्रोसेस में इन्वॉल्व रहे हैं, ये जो प्रोसेस है पूरी, वो जब आप BCCI के प्रेसिडेंट थे तब शुरू हुई थी, तो आप ये कमिटी को हेड करो. द कमिटी दैट विल ऑर्गेनाइज एंड एग्जीक्यूट दिस वर्ल्ड कप शुड बी हेडेड बाय यू. सो ही वाज देयर, बट यस, द प्राइम मिनिस्टर हैड टू स्टेप इन. तो दूरदर्शन की मोनोपोली थी, इसलिए उनका पीपल हैड नो ऑप्शन बट टू लिसन टू देम. सो आई थिंक जहां तक कि हमारे जनरेशन की बात है, आई थिंक वी वर वेरी हैप्पी एंड रिलीव्ड इन द अर्ली 90s when private channels came into the picture, or the quality of the television coverage went up, it improved by leaps and bounds. और वो एक दूरदर्शन का जो attitude था, where they took us for granted, that ended. तो but 1987 unfortunately एक ही चैनल था, उससे काम चलाना पड़ता था. BCCI को भी उनके साथ ही काम चलाना पड़ा, and of course Doordarshan made the BCCI pay. And remember, BCCI was not the BCCI of today. They had to struggle for money. It was an ongoing process. They had to do it, and they had to listen to everything that DD dictated.
बिल्कुल. और another interesting thing is the fact that today Doordarshan has no archival tape of that 87 World Cup because everything has been taped over. I can't wrap my head around this particular thing, that how can you let go of archival gold content like that, just like this?
वो तो दूरदर्शन वैसे ही है कि कोई आर्काइव्स नहीं. न सिर्फ 87 वर्ल्ड कप, बल्कि सुनील गावस्कर की 29th सेंचुरी, व्हेन ही इक्वल्ड ब्रैडमन्स रिकॉर्ड ऑफ द हाईएस्ट नंबर ऑफ टेस्ट सेंचुरीज, उनकी 30th सेंचुरी which he broke Bradman's record, all the great individual landmarks of the 80s. नथिंग इज देयर. एशियन गेम्स 82 का भी कुछ फुटेज नहीं है, थोड़ा बहुत शायद होगा, बट वो टेप के वो ओवर टेप करते थे ना उसको, क्योंकि वो कहते थे हमारे पास बजट नहीं है. अब मैं सोच रहा हूँ कि इतना पैसा लेते थे बीसीसीआई से मैचेस टेलीकास्ट करने के लिए, वो पैसे क्यों उन्होंने खर्च नहीं किए नए टेप्स को खरीदने में, ताकि जो फुटेज था वो रिटेन हो सकता था. बट उस पर ही वही पुराने टेप्स वो बार बार यूज करते थे. दैट वॉज जस्ट प्लेन एंड सिंपल इंडिफरेंस, एरोगेंस. और जैसे मैंने कहा, हम बहुत खुश थे जब उनकी मोनोपोली खत्म हुई.
बिल्कुल. और उस 87 वर्ल्ड कप के जो भी फुटेज है, इट इज देयर फॉर ऑल ऑफ अस टू सी और व्यू थ्रू द टेप्स दैट पीटीवी हैड, पाकिस्तान टीवी, और द कवरेज दैट बीबीसी डिड,
एंड सम प्राइवेट कलेक्टर्स जो वीसीआर वीडियो कैसेट्स पे उन्होंने मैचेस के हाइलाइट्स रिकॉर्ड किए, और वो कैसेट्स उन्होंने प्रिजर्व की. दे प्रोटेक्टेड देम फ्रॉम फंगस. एंड ईयर्स लेटर जब यूट्यूब आया तो उन्होंने वो सारा फुटेज यूट्यूब पे अपलोड कर दिया. सो वी आर वेरी ग्रेटफुल टू सच पीपल हु हैव केप्ट दोज मेमोरीज अलाइव.
बट वन थिंग इज दैट द 87 वर्ल्ड कप कवरेज ओवरऑल, जस्ट नॉट टू लेबर टू मच ऑन दिस पॉइंट, was supposed to be one of the better ones from the Doordarshan stable.
Yes, it was. Definitely. मतलब थोड़ा उन्होंने, they had done a bit of work. मुझे याद है पहली बार हमने स्क्वायर लेग एंगल से मैच देखी, लाइक रिप्लेस फ्रॉम द स्क्वायर लेग एंगल. लेकिन बाकी मुझे कहना पड़ेगा कि पाकिस्तान टीवी, पीटीवी का जो कवरेज था वो दूरदर्शन के कवरेज से अच्छा था, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान टीवी का कवरेज में दोनों एंड्स पे कैमराज होते थे. दूरदर्शन का कवरेज एक ही कैमरा होता था, मेन कैमरा. सो यू हैड टू सी द बैट्समैन्स बैक. बट पीटीवी वाज, whether we like to accept it or not, PTV in the 1987 World Cup was far superior to Doordarshan.
तो ये तो थी सारी जो अड़चने थी टूर्नामेंट से ठीक पहले. भारत की टीम के साथ भी काफी कुछ उथल पुथल हुआ था. वो particularly 86-87, the entire 14 months, the team had lost from winning positions and they were snatching defeat from the jaws of victory in every format, test or one dayers. And there was a camp at Udaipur, if I'm not mistaken, which got shifted. What was all that happening there?
So they decided to have a camp in Udaipur. First they picked the probables. तो सारे जो probables थे उनको उदयपुर बुलाया गया कैंप के लिए. And on the very first day or second day of that camp, किसी ने कहा कि ये wickets जो बनाए हैं they are not up to the mark. तो चलो कैंप शिफ्ट करते हैं. और देन कपिल देव, हु वाज द कैप्टन, ही टुक द इनिशिएटिव एंड ही शिफ्टेड दैट एंटायर कैंप बैग एंड बैगेज टू दिल्ली. तो वो थोड़ा सा, दैट वाज एम्बैरेसिंग फॉर द बीसीसीआई, बिकॉज फिर आपने आपने कौन से बेसिस पे उदयपुर को डिसाइड किया कि वहां पे कैंप करना है? उदयपुर हैड नो क्रिकेटिंग इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर टू स्पीक ऑफ. I mean, imagine a country like India, जहाँ पे we have the metros, we have cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad, we have the best of facilities, but Udaipur of all places, which had not hosted a single international match, तो वहाँ पे आप जाओ, पूरा बैग बैगेज लेके जाओ, सारे probables को लेके जाओ, और फिर आप 2 दिन में you pack up and you go to Delhi, where you should have been in the first place, probably. So that was a little embarrassing, I feel.
And also the squad underwent a lot of changes since the 83 World Cup, especially after they lost in Australia in the World Series Cup. The likes of Mohinder were kept away from the one-day squad. So we had specialists even before today's specialists.
तो वो एक बहुत ही अजीब फेज थी इंडियन क्रिकेट में. मेरे ख्याल से इंडियन क्रिकेट इन द लेट 80s एंड थ्रू आउट द 90s, उस जमाने के सिलेक्टर्स, मतलब आई वुडंट से ऑल ऑफ देम, बट मेनी ऑफ द सिलेक्टर्स हैड सम स्ट्रेंज क्वर्क्स, आई फेल्ट. जैसा कि मोहिंदर अमरनाथ, जो कि 1983 वर्ल्ड कप के ही वाज आफ्टर कपिल देव, ही वाज आवर मोस्ट कंसिस्टेंट प्लेयर विद बैट एंड बॉल. तो उनको तो उन्होंने मेरे ख्याल से कुछ वर्ल्ड कप के 6 महीने पहले बोल दिया था, 87 अर्ली 87 में, कि आपका तो सिलेक्शन होने वाला नहीं है. और एंड आई डाउट वेदर ही वाज इवन इन द प्रोबेबल्स. तो वो बहुत ही अजीब चीज
नहीं थे
कि 83 वर्ल्ड कप के सेमीफाइनल और फाइनल के मैन ऑफ द मैच, हु वाज स्टिल एन एक्टिव प्लेयर, इज नॉट इवन इन द प्रोबेबल्स फॉर द 87 वर्ल्ड कप इन विच वी आर द डिफेंडिंग चैंपियंस. और 87 वर्ल्ड कप होने के बाद 88 और 89 में वही मोहिंदर अमरनाथ वनडे क्रिकेट उन्होंने खेला, और मेरे ख्याल से 1 या 2 सेंचुरीज भी बनाए. सो ही वाज गोइंग स्ट्रांग. सो इट वाज वेरी बिजार.
वर्ल्ड कप के ठीक 10 दिन बाद देयर वाज अ सीरीज अगेंस्ट वेस्ट इंडीज एंड ही वाज पिक्ड इन द वनडे टीम.
सो इट वाज वेरी स्ट्रेंज. कौन से बेसिस पे क्या होता था पता नहीं चलता था. काफी सालों तक रवि शास्त्री को ग्रूम किया गया था एज अ फ्यूचर कैप्टन. तो सबसे पहले तो उनको कपिल देव का वाइस कैप्टन बना दिया था 85 में. एंड एक लॉन्ग टर्म प्लानिंग की बात कर रहे थे लोग के, ही इज ओनली 22-23, सो वी वांट हिम टू बिकम अ फ्यूचर कैप्टन ऑफ इंडिया. एंड सडनली 87 वर्ल्ड कप में दिलीप वेंगसरकर वाज मेड द वाइस कैप्टन. ही डिजर्व्ड इट ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ फॉर्म, बट फिर वो लॉन्ग टर्म प्लानिंग का क्या हुआ? सो इट वाज ऑल वेरी weird.
From the 83 World Cup, we spoke about Mohinder, Ravi Shastri, Vengsarkar. Few other players fell away by the wayside because Sandeep Patil retired in 86. Yashpal Sharma and Balwinder Sandhu, Sunil Walson, they went out of favor. Madan Lal also played till early 87 and then was not considered a
Yes. और रॉजर बिनी 87 वर्ल्ड कप की टीम में थे, लेकिन मेरे ख्याल से वो एक ही मैच खेला. पहला ही मैच खेला उन्होंने.
तो ये काफी एक चर्न प्रोसेस नेचुरली हो गया आपके हिसाब से, या फोर्स था इन अ वे बिकॉज ऑफ?
आई थिंक इट वाज अ कॉम्बिनेशन ऑफ बोथ. नेचुरल इन द सेंस, जैसे आपने कहा संदीप पाटिल, यशपाल शर्मा, दे वर फिनिश्ड बाय देन. संदीप पाटिल ने तो रिटायरमेंट ही अनाउंस कर लिया था. मदन लाल वाज स्टिल अ फोर्स इन डोमेस्टिक क्रिकेट. रॉजर बिनी आई थिंक वाज द अनलकी प्लेयर बिकॉज आई थिंक ही वाज केपेबल ऑफ डूइंग अ लॉट ऑन इंडियन सॉइल, जो उन्होंने इंग्लैंड में किया 83 में. आई थिंक 87 वर्ल्ड कप में अगर वो एक परमानेंट चॉइस होते 11 में, ही वुड हैव गिवन अस एन एक्स्ट्रा बैटिंग एंड बॉलिंग ऑप्शन. तो मेरे ख्याल से एक गलती शायद हुई हमारे टीम मैनेजमेंट से कि उन्होंने रॉजर बिनी को फर्स्ट चॉइस प्लेइंग 11 में नहीं लिया.
और एक चीज, एंड इफ यू आर वन हु बिलीव्स इन सुपरस्टिशन, दिस इज अ बिग वन, दैट इंडियन बोर्ड brought back PR Mansingh as the manager for the team, hoping that he'll bring the luck from
the lucky charm. Yeah. So Mansingh sir is a great guy, and that was the initial reaction of everybody, that they want him to replicate that magic. So yeah, he came back as the manager, and I remember there was a few interesting selections. Navjot Singh Sidhu, who had made his test debut in 1983 अगेंस्ट द वेस्ट इंडीज, और उस जमाने में वो उनको स्ट्रोकलेस वंडर कहा जाता था बिकॉज वो एक डिफेंसिव प्लेयर हुआ करते थे. फिर उनको टीम से निकाल दिया गया. 3 साल तक नोबडी रियली हर्ड अबाउट हिम. ही वाज डूइंग वेल फॉर पंजाब एट द डोमेस्टिक लेवल. सडनली 87 वर्ल्ड कप ही वाज बैक, ही वाज इन द टीम, एंड ही वाज अ ट्रांसफॉर्म्ड प्लेयर. वो छक्के मार रहे थे, चौके मार रहे थे. ही वाज अ कंप्लीटली डिफरेंट नवजोत सिंह सिद्धू. सो दैट वाज एन इंटरेस्टिंग सिलेक्शन, एंड आई थिंक ही प्रूव्ड द सिलेक्टर्स राइट. और एक ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन हमने देखा in a player called Sunil Manohar Gavaskar. 1983 वर्ल्ड कप तक उन्हें ऐसे एक डिफेंसिव प्लेयर कहा जाता था, कहते थे लोग कि वनडे क्रिकेट के लिए उनका गेम सूटेबल नहीं है। लेकिन 85 से लेके अगर आप उनका वनडे क्रिकेट का करियर ग्राफ देखेंगे, इट वाज अ डिफरेंट प्लेयर एंड ही हैड दिस ग्रेट ओपनिंग पार्टनरशिप विद कृष्णमाचारी श्रीकांत। और 87 वर्ल्ड कप आने तक कुछ ऐसे मैचेस हुए थे, वनडे मैचेस, जिसमें ही हैड आउटस्कोर्ड श्रीकांत। He had scored at a faster rate than even Shrikant. So we had this new Gavaskar, और it was his last series for India. तो वो चाहते थे कि he ends his career with a World Cup victory.
87 वर्ल्ड कप के ठीक पहले when he was playing for rest of world against MCC bicentenary match, he announced his test retirement, though there was speculation about it for 4-5 months. Finally, I think it was July 87 that he
July, August,
that he announced that I'm retiring from Test cricket after months of speculation. And after that, like you said, this World Cup was supposed to be his last World Cup. We spoke about then in terms of pace bowling options. You had Chetan Sharma, who had risen in rank and stature, even though he was in short height. Manoj Prabhakar, 86. Curiously, Manoj Prabhakar was with the Indian team in England, and Kapil Dev didn't think much about his ability and brought in Madan Lal as a replacement for Chetan Sharma. So these selections, how do you look at these
तो
selections?
मनोज प्रभाकर आई थिंक रियली वर्कड हिज वे अप, क्योंकि जैसे आपने कहा 86 में हम जब इंग्लैंड के टूर पे गए थे, तो द सेकंड टेस्ट एट लीड्स देयर वाज अ सिचुएशन वेयर चेतन शर्मा वाज इंजर्ड, तो मनोज प्रभाकर वाज पार्ट ऑफ द टीम, तो ऑब्वियसली ही वाज द ऑब्वियस चॉइस to take Chetan Sharma's place in that game. Lekin Kapil Dev he did not have confidence in Prabhakar's ability. तो मदन लाल जो इंडियन टीम में भी नहीं थे, वो उस वक्त इंग्लैंड में लीग क्रिकेट खेल रहे थे, उनको बुलाया गया वो सिर्फ एक मैच के लिए। But I think Manoj Prabhakar did not let that demoralize him. 86-87 season में he was consistent.
Or so we thought.
Or so we thought. And he went on to score a century also as an opening batsman in the 86-87 season. So he proved himself as an all-rounder. And I think he did very well in that 87 World Cup. मुझे याद है जिम्बाब्वे के अगेंस्ट हमारी जो मैच थी वानखेड़े पे, the league match, he took 3 or 4 wickets.
और आपने मानसिक की बात की थी, एक बात जो मुझे हैरान करती है, और it's the fact that for the manager's post there was actually a voting process in 83 where he beat Niranjan Shah, I think by one vote. And Mr. Shah till now tells me that it was the services vote that went against him, and they had promised him that he will vote. They will vote for him as the manager. I said, imagine the stories that you could have told everybody after that 83 World Cup. Things changed, and who knows what the story would have been for Mr. Shah, who later wore different hats in Indian cricket. Now, in terms of Sidhu as well, you spoke. From Stokeless Wonder, he became sixer Sidhu in that World Cup. I'll never forget his red helmet throughout the World Cup. And his celebration after taking catches, if you remember. I have seen him excited later on after retirement in comedy shows, but never seen him so excited like I saw him during the
World Cup,
87 World Cup. Now, coming to the inauguration per se, it was a strange way to inaugurate with a day-night match between India and Pakistan, but Imran didn't come.
Yeah, well, again, as I said, in the 80s, some very bizarre things happened in the 80s, and of course 90s. 90s में जो कुछ हुआ वो bizarre क्यों था वो हमें बाद में पता चला, but 80s में भी अभी imagine कीजिए, एक वर्ल्ड कप स्टार्ट हो रहा है, it's going to be played in white, सारे डे मैचेस हैं, लेकिन आप शुरुआत करते हो एक एग्जीबिशन, एक वो ऑफिशियल मैच भी नहीं थी, देयर वाज एन एग्जीबिशन मैच इंडिया वर्सेस पाकिस्तान, प्लेड अंडर लाइट्स एट द जवाहरलाल नेहरू स्टेडियम दिल्ली, जो कि क्रिकेट ग्राउंड नहीं है, तो वहां पे मेकशिफ्ट पिच लगाया गया और वहां पे वो मैच खेली गई। मेरे ख्याल से कुछ 40 ओवर की 45 ओवर्स की थी, और उस मैच के पहले एक ओपनिंग सेरेमनी थी जहां सारी टीम्स थी, राजीव गांधी इंडिया के प्राइम मिनिस्टर वहां पे आए थे, सो ही शुक हैंड्स विद ऑल द प्लेयर्स, और फिर ये मैच खेली गई। आज शायद ऐसे नहीं होगा, क्योंकि कोई भी टीम कहेगी कि हमें एग्जीबिशन मैच नहीं खेलनी वर्ल्ड कप के शुरू में, व्हाट इफ देयर इज सम इंजरी और समथिंग। तो ये मेरे ख्याल से सिर्फ 80s में पॉसिबल हो सकता था। तो यू हैड पीपल कमिंग ऑफ अ शॉर्ट रन, ऑफ कोर्स इंडिया वर्सेस पाकिस्तान, चाहे वो एग्जीबिशन मैच हो या ऑफिशियल मैच हो, एवरीथिंग इज यू प्ले टू विन, और मेरे ख्याल से इंडिया ने वो मैच जीती भी थी। we batted first and then bowled Pakistan out, won by about 30-40 runs. लेकिन वो थोड़ा अजीब लग रहा था कि यार वर्ल्ड कप तो व्हाइट्स में खेल रहे हैं, लेकिन इनॉग्रेशन के टाइम पे एक डे नाइट मैच खेली जा रही है इन कलर्ड क्लोथिंग. और कलर्ड क्लोथिंग भी एक्चुअली नहीं था, सिर्फ जर्सी कलर्ड थी, नीचे वाला हिस्सा पूरा व्हाइट था. वो जमाने में नाइट क्रिकेट वगैरह नहीं होता था, मतलब इट वाज अ नॉवेल्टी. 2-3 साल में एक बार कोई एग्जीबिशन मैच वगैरह होती थी. सिर्फ ऑस्ट्रेलिया में कलर्ड क्लोथिंग में क्रिकेट एंड न्यूजीलैंड में देखने को मिलता था. सो या इट वाज क्वाइट वियर्ड.
And also that particular venue, 4 years before that, in '83 also, India Pakistan played that Kirti Azad wala match.
वो भी like that was also an exhibition
match for the Prime Minister's relief
fund. Yeah.
But '84 and '91, that venue hosted day night internationals.
Yes.
'84 against Australia and '91 against South Africa.
Correct.
The common factor in both were Kapil Dev, Ravi Shastri, and Vengsarkar from the Indian side.
Yeah.
In both the matches,
and
Kepler vessels, once for Australia and once for South Africa. These, so we are a bit of geeks on this particular thing. So we're sorry about this extra information about it.
To digress.
But that '87 World Cup inauguration, I've read some amazing pieces about that inaugural ceremony. That कुछ balloon थे और वो balloon में से gas जल्दी निकल गया. And it became a security scare, and the Prime Minister had to be whisked away from the venue when the plan was that he will come down and greet the players. The players were asked to then go up and greet the players. So that was a scare on that.
That was a scare. I remember him. There is this part of the Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium where the torch is lit. And he was standing at that point, so at the highest point of the stadium, and all the teams were climbing up the stairs, shaking his hand and moving on. So that was also very unusual. Usually the teams line up and the dignitary, whoever it is, walks from one player to the other and shakes the players' hands. Here the players were doing the walking and the Prime Minister was standing at one spot.
अजीब और गरीब चीज है. अजीब और गरीब चीज. I've never seen anything like that, and it became a big security scare that day in the '87 World Cup. So we've seen everything, all these things, and then the action actually begins with a thriller. India-Australia at Madras, now Chennai. And in that match, it's also there was a bit of a drama where mid innings the score changed.
Yes.
Then Madras, as it is, Chennai is called as it is called now, and Madras then was then they were becoming used to these kind of thrillers.
Yes, because India had played Australia in a test match at Chennai the year before, and it had ended in a tie, only the second in test history. And the first World Cup match on Indian soil was again India versus Australia at Chennai, and Australia won by 1 run. When Australia batted first, Dean Jones had hit Shastri for what looked like a 6, but the umpire signaled 4. But then at the interval, Hanif Mohammed, who was the match adjudicator, the Australians spoke to him, he then spoke to the umpires, and that 4 was changed to 6. So the Australians got 2 extra runs. And as it turned out, they won that match by 1 run. So, that is one of the classic what might have beens, because Australia won that game by 1 run and they went on to win that World Cup. So maybe it just was the shot in the arm that the Australian team needed at that point of time.
Absolutely. And interesting thing that you mentioned about adjudicator, इस टूर्नामेंट में काफी अलग चीजें थी. 83 से पहली बात, ये वर्ल्ड कप 50 ओवर का वर्ल्ड कप था. 83 तक the World Cups were played over 60 overs. This particular World Cup onwards, you add the concept of neutral umpires.
Yes.
And the umpires were from different countries, unlike till the '83 World Cup, when we believed the word of an English umpire.
Correct.
And all the matches had English umpires. This particular World Cup, you had umpires from different countries. And for the first time in this World Cup, we had the earlier avatar of a match referee in the form of a match adjudicator. What was a match adjudicator?
His job basically was to ensure that everything goes as per plan, the teams play in the right spirit, and most importantly, to decide the winner of the Player of the Match award.
So it is not really a match referee, but it is slightly smaller role than a match referee.
I think India-Pakistan came up with this very smart idea of honoring former cricketers. So they very smartly gave those duties to eminent former cricketers like Hanif Mohammed of Pakistan. He came over to India. A lot of former Indian cricketers went over to Pakistan. And as you said, there was an international umpires panel. So every game had two neutral umpires. So an India-Australia match was adjudicated by umpires from, say, England and Pakistan, and so on. So in a way, the '87 World Cup should be given a lot of credit for starting the globalization of cricket. Apart from taking the World Cup out of the UK, I think there were a lot of things that happened in '87 which continued in the subsequent World Cup. So after that, every World Cup had an international panel of umpires. So '87 deserves a lot of credit. As you said, the matches were 50 overs a side, obviously because the day in India and Pakistan is not as long as the day in England, where the sun sets only after 9 p.m. Here in October, November, the sun goes down at 5 p.m. itself. So they had to play 50 over games, start at 5 minutes to 9 in the morning, and finish by 4:45 latest.
And there were two groups, like in '83. The India's group had India, Australia, New Zealand, and Zimbabwe. The other group had Pakistan, Sri Lanka, West Indies, and England. These were the two groups, and the format remained the same as '83. Only the number of overs reduced from 60 to 50. Now, Zimbabwe again qualified for this World Cup, but were they the same side that, as in, were they as threatening as they were in '83?
I don't think so, because '83 World Cup, many of their cricketers had played a lot of either. Some had played county, but a lot of them were playing league cricket in England. So they were a lot more familiar with the English conditions than the subcontinental conditions. So I don't really think anybody expected them to make a big impact. But still, they gave New Zealand a scare in their very first match. David Houghton, the wicketkeeper batsman, he scored a great century. But New Zealand ultimately won. But the other group, the where most of the matches were played in Pakistan, which had Pakistan, Sri Lanka, England, West Indies, that was the group of death, because you had Pakistan, England, and West Indies competing for two semi-final slots. Even the Sri Lankans, they were a talented side, but honestly, they were not really taken all that seriously at that time.
And you spoke about Zimbabwe and New Zealand. New Zealand, Australia also played a couple of interesting encounters in that tournament.
Exactly. They New Zealand, Australia always have a great rivalry, but it was New Zealand. One always got the feeling that they lack that X factor in order to cross the line. And this reminds me of something very significant. In today's times, we are in 2023. Can you imagine any of the leading cricketers from across the world refusing, and I repeat, refusing to come to India to, say, play the IPL or anything? Yes, there have been cases of some Australian cricketers saying that they want to focus on their international commitments. But imagine in the IPL era, cricketers from across the world saying that, we are not really keen on coming to India. But in 1987, there were some very big names who decided to skip the 1987 World Cup. So, and the names are like a who's who of cricket of the '80s. You had Malcolm Marshall, Gordon Greenidge of the West Indies, Richard Hadley of New Zealand, David Gower of England. Botham, but Botham had taken the entire season off, and even Gower. But yeah, they should have made an exception for the World Cup, because after all, it was the World Cup. But they decided to give it a miss. Would they have given the World Cup a miss had it been held in England as per the original plan? I don't think so. So with all due respect, that was a period when India and Pakistan were considered out of the way cricketing backwaters by the English, the Australians, and even the West Indies. So yeah, it seems unbelievable today. But these big cricketers decided to skip the World Cup of all tournaments.
And also, there's one more thing that came to my mind, is the fact that the English team almost didn't come for that World Cup because of the South Africa issue. A lot of the English players at that time had played or had some connection with South Africa, and South Africa of '80s is not South Africa of today, in the sense that they were actually outcast because of their apartheid policy, where they favored the whites over the colored people. And Graham Gooch and some of the English players had gone and played in South Africa in '81, '82, and they had been banned, and people like Graham Gooch and all were coming back after that ban in '86, and the Indian government had an issue with that particular issue.
Yes.
And the World Cup went ahead only on the assurance that the ICC will discuss this issue later on.
Exactly. Because South Africa, as you said, that time had this very regressive apartheid policy, as a result of which the South African team had been banned from international cricket way back in 1970. So that ban was very much on. Nelson Mandela was still in prison. The browns and blacks in South Africa were being treated as second class secondary citizens. There was racial discrimination in that country. So Indians, obviously, we were very sensitive about these things, and we were not very happy about some members of the England team having had cricketing connections with South Africa, having played in South Africa. So the objections were raised, but as you said, the ICC just took that into account and said that we'll thrash all this out. Let this World Cup be played, because again, it's a World Cup.
And amazingly, Gooch, who was part of the team in the 87 World Cup, 12 months later, he was supposed to travel as England captain for a full tour. And that tour got cancelled because of the same South Africa issue.
Exactly. But again, that was a bilateral series. So I guess the Indian government was able to concentrate, and they decided to adopt a stricter stand.
So these things, India missed out on 5 test matches in 88, 89 because of the whole South Africa angle. And so that's a different matter altogether. Now, this particular World Cup, we spoke about the other group, we spoke about India's group. Australia had traveled to India a year before in 86, played a full series, and they were a young team. Team again, because of retirements in 84, 85, they lost a lot of players. Kim Hughes and a bunch of players went to South Africa. Again, they got banned. So Alan Border was with a very young team, and he was the most experienced person in that lineup. 86, they ran India close in the one-days and test matches. They come back in 87. They come much earlier than any other side. Train in Chennai at the Mahabalipuram beach. I'm getting worried now because in 2023 as well, they're coming much earlier than any other team. So the similarities are very stark. So what is it about that Australian team that built up Bob Simpson as the new coach or cricket manager as it was called then? What is it about that Australian team that you remember most?
No, I remember their fielding. They would just throw themselves at the ball on the hard Indian outfields, because Indian outfields are not as soft as those in England, Australia. So that is one thing I remember. We were very impressed by the way the Australians would throw themselves on the field, and the general attitude. Players like Dean Jones, they were always, the way they carried themselves with the collars rolled up. Alan Border was always a hero, and they had, as you said, they had been to India the previous year, so the memories were still fresh. And Australia have always been a very popular team in India, and I'm sure even in Pakistan as well. And Bob Simpson as coach, I think that made a massive difference, because it helps when you have a very respected figure from your own past as your mentor and coach. And he came up with this formula where he advocated that you should make every ball of a 50-over innings count. Even if you take a single of every ball of a 50-over innings, it still means that you score 300. And in those days, in 1987, any score of about 250 was considered a winning score. So he emphasized the gains of taking singles constantly, keeping the scoreboard ticking, making it very difficult for the opposition bowlers to constantly vary their line and length to different batsmen on strike, and fitness and fielding and catching. So the Australians were very, very powerful, popular, and we found that in the final as well. Because Australia played England in the final at Kolkata, and nobody really wanted England to win because they were our former rulers. So Australia were adopted as the home team.
And amazingly, on the other side, West Indies, which was a force to reckon with. तो 83 वर्ल्ड कप तक, मतलब उसके बाद भी वो एक खतरनाक टेस्ट टीम थे. वनडे क्रिकेट में उनका ग्राफ ऊपर नीचे हो रहा था, क्योंकि उतने ज्यादा वो टूर्नामेंट्स बायलैटरल वगैरह नहीं जीत रहे थे जितना वो पहले जीत रहे थे. पर 87 वर्ल्ड कप दे वर वीकेंड साइड. There was no holding, there was no Garner, there was no Andy Roberts, Greenidge,
and Marshall.
No Marshall. So they were a weekend side, yet there were some games where they did quite well, especially Viv Richards. But they were known for other things in that World Cup, apart from their exploits on the field. And Courtney Walsh was the prime character. And I think Courtney Walsh, they would probably have a street in Lahore named after him.
So I think West Indies थोड़े से unlucky भी थे. मुझे याद है there were two close games, one against England और दूसरा वो पाकिस्तान का जो मैच था, that was a heartbreaker for them because it's difficult to imagine a situation where the last pair is on strike. Pakistan's last pair was on strike in the middle. 10 runs needed of 3 balls. Abdul Qadir batting. Abdul Qadir was a decent bat, but he was no Javed Miyadad. And you have Courtney Walsh who had bowled brilliantly in his first 9 overs. Courtney Walsh ke haath mein ball hai. And guess what happens? Abdul Qadir hits him for 6 at 2 and 2, and the match is over. Pakistan wins by 1 wicket. And I remember Vivian Richards collapsing and lying on the ground, in a state of shock. And of course, as you said, they better name a street in Lahore after Courtney Walsh, because I think twice in that over, Courtney Walsh had a chance to run the non-striker Salim Jaffer out, because Salim Jaffer was getting out of the crease, backing up too far, even before Courtney Walsh approached the umpire in his run-up. And Courtney Walsh warned him twice. He did not need to, but he still did. So in that sense, he displayed a lot of sportsman spirit. But it cost his team the match.
बिल्कुल. एंड दूसरी तरफ इंडिया की बात करें, इंडिया lost a match against Australia, the first one, which they should have won. They messed up that chase completely. And again, we had seen that a lot in
those days, I remember that match at Chennai, we were coasting, I think, some 6 or 7 wickets in hand, and the asking rate was not more than 5 runs and over. But everybody just decided to play Rambo, I think, just decided to be a hero. And I think the batsmen got themselves out instead of the Australians getting them out. And we lost by 1 run. I mean, it was really heartbreaking.
Beat Zimbabwe twice, no hiccups this time. Unlike 83, no magic required from Kapil Dev against Zimbabwe in 87. Both the games where they won quite easily, I think in Ahmedabad and Mumbai. So that was done. Now played New Zealand twice. We'll come first to the one at Bangalore, which required a special from Kapil Dev with the bat.
Yes.
Azhar with the bat, and More as well. That was a fantastic win. That again, they ran India close. Yeah, it was a close encounter there.
Yes, it was close, but I think we hung in there. We had greater experience of those conditions, and I think we started off very badly. But Kapil Dev and Kiran More, their stand was crucial, and I think that gave us a shot in the arm. After that, there was only going to be one result. So New Zealand did well, but we kept getting wickets at regular intervals.
So now India played Australia again at Delhi. And this was a big encounter in the sense that it was the revenge encounter. And India did well with the bat, 289, I suppose.
Yes. 289 batting first in 1987 was a big score. And then we bowled and fielded very well. I remember Kapil took one terrific catch to dismiss Greg Dyer. Manoj Prabhakar, a man not known for his fielding. I remember Alan Border hit one straight down the ground, and Prabhakar was literally on the boundary line, and he saw the ball coming. He saw where his foot was, and he judged it perfectly. That was, I think, Navjot Singh Sidhu took a great catch. Azharuddin, who at that time used to be our 6th bowler. He used to bowl a few overs. He took 3 wickets, including one great reflex catch of Craig McDermott. Azharuddin, in fact, won the man of the match because he had scored a 50. And then he went on to take 3 wickets. So it was a good win. So by the time our second last league match ended, and we were to play New Zealand in our last league match, the situation was that India and Australia were equal on points. Not equal on points. We were 2 points behind Australia, but and we had to win. Obviously, we had to defeat New Zealand in our last match and defeat them and try and get a net run rate that was superior to Australia's if we wanted to top the group. So that was the scenario where Pakistan and England had qualified from the other group, and as per the rules, the team from Group B, that is Pakistan's group, the topper from Group B was to play the second ranking team from Group A at Lahore in the semi-final, and the topper of Group A was to play the second ranked team from Group B in the second semi-final at Mumbai. And Pakistan and England, it was already clear. Pakistan was number 1 from Group B and England was number 2. So Pakistan was to play the semi-final at Lahore and England was to play at Mumbai. It remained to be seen which of the two teams from Group A would play where. And obviously India wanted to play the semi-final on home turf at Mumbai. You know, the players did not want to go to Lahore. So New Zealand batted first in that match at Nagpur, scored I think 221 or something, 221 for 8. And India needed 222 to win and to top the group and acquire a net run rate that was superior to Australia's. I think we needed to score those runs in 42.1 overs or something like that. And we did it with again someone called Sunil Manohar Gavaskar just going hammer and tongs. I remember what an innings it was. He outscored Shrikant. He was hitting 4 sixes almost at will, and despite running a temperature. That is one thing I remember about that game. And of course, when New Zealand batted, Chetan Sharma created history. He took the first all bold hat trick
In the world.
in a one day international and the first hat trick in a World Cup.
So also one more thing about the Chetan Sharma in the 87 World Cup. He was out and there was a lot of pressure on Kapil to bring in Sanjeev Sharma as a replacement for Chetan Sharma because he was suffering from a shoulder injury. But Kapil was insistent that Chetan Sharma will stay with the team. It's something about injury and World Cups. Piyush Chawla 2007, like we spoke
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
2011 as well, something similar happened.
Yes.
So something about World Cup. So I'm not casting any doubt here, but I'm hoping that if something similar happens in 2023, we wouldn't mind because
Yeah.
there is a precedent.
There is a precedent, obviously, yes, very much so. Chetan Sharma was a hard-working cricketer, and I think it's unfortunate after all these years he still remembered कि वो last ball पे छक्का मारा. और उसके बाद उन्होंने क्या किया? He went to England in 1986. One of the reasons we won that series, Test series in England, was because of his bowling. और फिर 87 World Cup में hat trick. He also scored a century in 89. So he did a lot for India, I think, and he deserved a lot more chances as well.
He deserved a lot more even after retirement
Yeah.
in terms of not being stung. If you know what I mean. So now we've established that India made it to the semi-final, and there was a lot of buzz about the semi-final, and we were all certain that it will be like a grand finish to the careers of Imran Khan and Gavaskar at Eden Gardens.
India versus Pakistan final, Eden Gardens. That was, everyone had taken it for granted.
And it was supposed to be the fairy tale finish for two best friends, Imran and Gavaskar, end of their careers, ending at the same place. Everything was set because Imran had also made up his mind. Gavaskar had also made up his mind.
But unfortunately, Australia played spoilsport at Lahore and England played spoilsport at Mumbai.
Yes, and completely destroyed everybody's plans.
Yes.
And in fact, I was speaking to Ayaz Memon the other day, the senior veteran cricket writer, and he was telling me he had gone to Lahore to cover the semi-final, and there was a charter flight which was going to get them from Lahore to Bombay. So it was basically going to be the fact that a Pakistani team would come on that charter to Bombay, and then they will watch the semi-final in Bombay, and then fly from Bombay to Calcutta for the final. That was the plan.
With the Indian team.
With the Indian team. That was the plan. And Ayaz tells me that when he flew from Lahore, it was an empty flight, just him. So that semi-final in Lahore, that was a heartbreak because everything that could go wrong for Pakistan
Went wrong.
Salim Yusuf's injury, the other knocks that were played by Australia, and that everything went wrong for Pakistan.
Yes. I remember that the first semi-final was Pakistan-Australia at Lahore and India was to play England the next day in Mumbai. So as you mentioned, Salim Yusuf, the wicketkeeper, got hit on the face. So Javed Miandad had to take over as wicketkeeper. And now Javed Miandad, of course, is a legendary cricketer, but wicketkeeping definitely was not his strongest point. But so he struggled a bit. There was one very significant moment in Australia's innings. Australia batted first, where Steve Waugh and Simon O'Donnell, they were stranded at the same end, and there was a run out. And Steve Waugh started walking back to the pavilion, thinking that he's the one who is out. And the umpires conferred, and they called Steve Waugh back. They said, "Simon O'Donnell is out. You have to stay back." Steve Waugh stayed on, and as it turned out, he was facing the last over of the Australian innings, bowled by Salim Jaffer, the left-arm paceman. And in that one over, Steve Waugh scored 18 runs. He hit, I think, Salim Jaffer for 3 or 4 boundaries. Steve Waugh, who had been called back by the umpires. And I think the margin of Pakistan's victory was also 18 runs.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Australia's victory, I beg your pardon. It was 18 runs. So Steve was 18 runs in that last over, made all the difference. The decision of the umpires to call Steve Waugh back and send Simon O'Donnell out made a big difference.
Absolutely, and there were tears all over Lahore. Imran was dejected. He wanted to win the World Cup. He had put everything into that tournament, and unfortunately, he thought at that time that it was going to be his last ever appearance for Pakistan. And
But as they say, picture abhi baki hai mere dost.
at that time, they didn't need to send a text like Ben Stokes sent to Moeen Ali or Josh Butler calling Ben Stokes to come back into one day cricket.
Yeah.
It required the intervention of Zia-ul Haq to call Imran back into international cricket after that particular World Cup.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a different story. In Bombay, uh, Graham Gooch kept sweeping Maninder, Ravi Shastri, and little did we know that he was sweeping India out of the World Cup.
So I remember that match, the second semi-final, India versus England. I think we were all very relieved that Pakistan was out of the fray. We thought we will beat England and then we'll beat Australia in the final at Kolkata. No big deal. And I remember I was in the 7th grade at that point, and the Diwali vacation had ended, and this India-England semi-final was on the first day of the second semester. And there was mass bunking in school. I think nobody went to school that day. Everyone stayed back at home to watch the match on television. And as it was a heartbreaker, because Graham Gooch, he had planned meticulously. He had local bowlers bowling to him in the nets, and he kept playing the sweep shot. And I think the Indians were probably taken by surprise because they did not have a plan B. When Graham Gooch kept sweeping Ravi Shastri and Maninder Singh, Kapil Dev kept thinking that probably it's only a matter of time before he gets a toppage and he gives a catch. Graham Gooch did get a toppage and he was out, but he had already scored a century by then.
So, was it the feeling that India had a one-dimensional bowling attack because Shivramakrishnan was in the squad, but the captain didn't have the confidence that Gavaskar had in Shivramakrishnan?
I think Shivaramakrishnan was in the squad, but he was a shadow of his former self by then and not doing very well. And in fact, Kapil Dev also was not the same bowler that he was. In fact, if memory serves me right, Kapil Dev went wicketless in the first few matches and he took his first wicket of that World Cup in the match at Delhi against Australia. So he himself was not doing well. Chetan Sharma and Prabhakar were. So it was all basically the spinners. The Ravi Shastri and Maninder Singh were having this job of constantly bailing the team out of a tight situation. So if either of them or both of them were to have a bad day, we were going to be in big trouble. And that is exactly what happened in the semi-final.
So India was set a stiff target in the semi-final, and it was everybody's hope that Gavaskar in his final encounter on his home turf would score a big one and then take India into the final. But that didn't happen.
That didn't happen. He fell for 4, I think. But again, I think we did well. Azharuddin batted very well, and later on Kapil Dev also did well. I think we still would have won the game. But then there were some odd things like Azharuddin trying to go for a paddle sweep when he was clearly, he had cemented himself in the middle. He should have gone on, but he tried a paddle sweep, was leg before. Kapil Dev hit a 6, then tried to repeat the shot, was caught on the boundary line. Mike Gadding, the England captain, he anticipated the shot. He himself went to the boundary line and the ball literally fell into his lap. So again, it was a case of missed opportunities. Dilip Vengsarkar, the top number 1 batsman, he was down with food poisoning.
So again, there's some coincidences here. The 2023 semi-final is also going to happen in Mumbai. So if there's an Indian batter and India is slated, like it has been announced by the ICC that the semi-final, if India qualifies, will be played in Mumbai. So if any Indian batsman is listening to us right now, they shouldn't have seafood before the semi-final.
Yes, they should not have. Yes. Very, very important. Vengsarkar was down, and Chandrakant Pandit, who was the second wicketkeeper in the team, he played as a specialist batsman. But again, I mean, Pandit, great cricketer, but Vengsarkar was at his peak in 1987, and that was a big blow to us. I think had he played, we would have still achieved that target without any issues.
And as it so happened, in 86 and 87, I'm reminded of this dialogue from this movie, Dhamal, where in every situation, the character of Javed Jafri says, मैं हमेशा आगे कैसे रह जाता हूँ, हम सब पीछे रह जाते हैं. it so happens that Ravi Shastri is always stranded with the team.
Yes, but that happens when you're batting at number 6 or number 7. It is likely to happen. But yeah, it was disappointing. That was the end of Sunil Gavaskar's career, and as it turned out later, it was also the end of Kapil Dev's
Captaincy.
captaincy. And then, of course, Australia versus England at Kolkata. I remember the Australians and English both were very keen that Dickie Bird should officiate in the final at Kolkata. Because they had complete faith in. So what if Dickie Bird was an Englishman? Again, I have to say this is again a little bit of that superiority attitude that let him be there, because Dickie Bird was part of that international panel of umpires, and he had also umpired in the first 3 finals in 75, 79, 83. But full credit to the organizers for saying that no, that it will be neutral umpires. And so you had an umpire from India and Pakistan. I think it was Ram Babu Gupta and Mehboob Shah of Pakistan. Ram Babu Gupta of India, they stood in that final at Kolkata.
And interestingly, in the final, Channel 9, which was telecasting so the way it worked out for the 87 World Cup was the footage in India went from Doordarshan to BBC, and Channel 9, which was originally planning to send a crew and do the commentary from venue, said that no, we'll take the footage from BBC. Channel 9 actually broke for movie on that particular day when the final was on.
Yes.
And they didn't show the final. I think the chase by England. They didn't show the chase by England.
There's a little bit of Doordarshan in Channel 9 also.
So that didn't happen. So Australia batted first. They put up a stiff target as per 1987 standards. And then in the chase, England messed up, much like what India messed up
In the semi-final, exactly, because again, the way Mike Gatting especially was batting, England should have won, and England had a deep batting lineup. But then that fateful moment where Alan Border, the Australian captain, in a desperate bid, decided to have a bowl himself, and he bowled one down the leg side. Mike Gatting could have hit that ball anywhere on the leg side. He could have swept it, he could have pulled it, but he decided to go for a reverse sweep and play it on the offside. As it turned out, he reverse swept it. The ball got a top edge, hit Mike Gatting on the shoulder, and popped up for the wicketkeeper to take an easy catch. And that was the turning point of the match.
Yes, and after that, England could not come back into the match.
Although, of course, Philip de Freitas tried at the very end, hit a couple of big sixes, but then he was caught on the boundary line, and that was it.
That was it, and they won by 7 runs. And Australia became world champion against all odds. Now, today, when we say this, it might seem a bit odd, but in 87, the Australian team was first weakened by retirements, then by desertions because players had gone on to play in South Africa. So it was really the third string Australian side. They were really scraping the bottom of the barrel to get the players in for that particular tournament, and they won the World Cup.
Exactly, and look at that Australian team. If most of those players went on to do very well for Australia over the next decade. So when you talk about the great Australian teams of the late 90s and early 2000s, the foundation was laid by that team captained by Alan Border. From the 87 World Cup, they were always traveling in one direction, that was upwards. They did lose a couple of test series against the West Indies, but then the West Indies were a formidable team at that time. But if you look at their record against the other countries, they were steadily climbing their way back. They won, they had this huge Ashes wins in the late 80s and early 90s. And then 1994-95, they went to the West Indies and they beat the West Indies in a test series. And that formally became the #1 side. And many members of that 1994-95 Australian team had been part of the 87 World Cup winning team.
So a lot changed after that 87 World Cup, not just for Australia. England kept changing captains, England kept changing sides. In 88, they had 4 captains in 6 test matches against West Indies. That was amazing. And India also went through a period of change from 87 to 1990 where they kept changing captains,
Changing
players.
Dilip Vengsarkar was appointed captain of India after the 87 World Cup. And that was a classic case of bad luck, if one may say so, because out of, I think he led India in 11 or test matches or so, and 8 of them were against the West Indies. And the West Indies of the late 80s, it was a tough proposition, playing all those fast bowlers. And then he was replaced by Shrikant. Shrikant led in one series in Pakistan. Then he was replaced by Azharuddin. So yeah, the late 80s were a very turbulent phase.
And before the 87 World Cup also, and you are better placed than me to answer this, there was a bit of a campaign, as in like the players were up against the board for some endorsement of if they wanted to put up Reliance logo on their shirt. Did that also play a part, that they waited for the World Cup to end and then they cracked the whip?
Yes, that was a phase where the relationship between the players and the board was very, very bad. In fact, things escalated after the 87 World Cup, where Dilip Vengsarkar, the captain of India, was suspended from 6 months because he was writing a newspaper column, and the BCCI said that you cannot do that when you are the captain of India. And there were issues regarding pertaining to players' payments. When we went to the West Indies for a tour in '89, some of the players stayed back and went to play some exhibition matches in the US. And the BCCI objected to that. They banned 6 or 7 senior cricketers for a year. But then, of course, there was an outcry. The Supreme Court got involved, and those players returned. Then there was an attempt by the players to revive the Players Association. So it was a very, bad time for the relationship between the BCCI and the players. And one got the feeling that by the time that phase ended, the more assertive members of that team, the players who are not hesitant to speak their mind and not hesitant to challenge the board, they were in a way gradually edged out. And people who were perceived as milder, politically correct, they were elevated. Let's not get into names, but
You can read between the lines. No, but 87 World Cup, was it a convenient excuse that India lost to sack Kapil as captain? Because I remember there was some confusion about that. Kapil went over to Goa after the World Cup. Vengsarkar was not informed of
I
it.
think Kapil was on trial because just 6 months before that World Cup, he had committed the worst crime that an Indian cricket captain can commit, which was to lose a Test series to Pakistan. In fact, I remember being surprised when he was appointed captain of the World Cup team in the first place. Because if you look at history, Bishan Singh Bedi, Gavaskar were both sacked as captains after losing to Pakistan. Asif Iqbal of Pakistan was sacked as captain after losing to India. So in a way, it was a surprise that they went ahead with Kapil. It was a good decision because there was continuity. We had played a lot of one-day cricket in '86, '87. So in that sense, it was the right decision to go ahead with Kapil Dev. And we really had a very good team in that '87 World Cup. I remember some conversations with people like Dilip Vengsarkar, where he said that in his view, the '87 World Cup team was stronger than the '83 and '85 Indian teams that won the World Cup and World Championship of Cricket respectively. So in that sense, probably Kapil would have known that his days as captain are numbered.
So, thus ended India's golden run in one-day cricket in the 80s. And it changed a lot. We don't know if it is for the better or for the worse for Indian cricket. What's your view?
I think it has to be said that we took a few backward steps in the late 80s and even in the 90s. And then it took the new millennium for us to really get back on track.
Absolutely. So, this was yet another episode of India Sports News leading up to the 2023 ODI World Cup. We've already spoken about the 83 World Cup. We have now spoken about the 87 World Cup. And in the coming episodes, we'll be looking back at some other tournaments, some where India has won, some where India came close, and some where India didn't do well at all. But for that, you'll need to keep logging on. Please like, share, subscribe this channel, and also listen to us on all our podcast platforms. Next time, we'll be back with another episode on another World Cup. Till then, take care.